President Barack Obama was not yet born when a courageous teacher in New Orleans, Louisiana, was about to display the strength and commitment that would show a divided city and our nation the light of truth that would demolish long-standing prejudice and help to open a new world of opportunities for every African American across the land. That individual's name is Mrs. Barbara Henry. Mrs. Henry played a major role in civil rights progress, but she did not seek to be a part of history. She sought only to follow her heart and do what she believed was right. Mrs. Henry recounted in August of 2001, "I was invited by the superintendent of New Orleans schools to take a first grade. I asked if it would be one of the integrated schools, and he said, 'Well, I'm not supposed to tell you, but it is. Would that make any difference to you?' I was stunned then and still am somewhat incredulous at that question. I could not imagine that any teacher would need to have that question asked of her. But later I realized why that wasn't so unrealistic when I found out that the woman who was to have been Ruby's teacher resigned rather than face a black child. Mrs. Henry took the hand of first grader Ruby Nell Bridges, and together they stepped over the threshold of history and through the door opened by the Supreme Court in 1954. Public schools had been segregated in the South since the Civil War, and the schools for blacks were nowhere near equal to the school for whites.
In the 1890s, a Supreme Court decision came down that allowed for separate but equal. It's Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Supreme Court ruled that the South would be allowed to create separate but equal schools. One of the big issues is that if you don't get an education, you can't get as good a job. The black community is very much harmed by its inability to get these good jobs.
The beginning of the end for school segregation came on May 17, 1954, when the decision on Brown versus the Board of Education was read by Chief Justice Earl Warren. Segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored children. The impact is greater when it has the sanction of the law, for the policy of separating races is usually interpreted as denoting the inferiority of the Negro group. Many whites throughout the South were not happy with the Supreme Court's decision and fought integration.
Throughout the South, what happened when the schools were desegregated is this became very much a concern for whites. It was more touchy to integrate the schools than anything else, or desegregate the schools. In New Orleans, there was a very strong reaction. The white community was very angry that their schools were going to be desegregated.
One of the schools was the William Frantz Elementary, where angry mobs of parents, teachers, and the administration were about to make things difficult for Ruby Nell Bridges and her dedicated and courageous teacher, Barbara Henry. To the segregationists, Ruby and Barbara Henry were the enemies, two against a force of ignorance and hatred. In 2007, Barbara Henry reflected, "We created an oasis of love, and we were able to shut out the hurts of cruelty, prejudice, and bigotry that surrounded us both inside and outside the building." In adulthood, Ruby Bridges remembered, "The people I passed every morning as I walked up the school steps were full of hate. They were white, but so was my teacher, Mrs. Henry, who couldn't have been more different from them. She was one of the most loving people I had ever known." I remember Mrs. Henry explaining integration to me and why some people were against it. She told me, "It's not easy for people to change once they have gotten used to living a certain way. Some of them don't know any better, and they're afraid." If Barbara Henry was afraid, she never let it get in the way of her commitment and determination to be there for Ruby every day. Mrs. Henry told me, "To go back to teach Ruby every day, I felt a tremendous responsibility. I promised the superintendent that I would teach, and I kept my word. When I first met Ruby, I saw how all alone she was and how she needed a friend. We became best friends. I fell in love with Ruby because I thought that she was special and wonderful. It was a love story. We had each other." In the spring of 1961, Mrs. Henry had found out that 3 or 4 other first graders had been coming to the school for a while. She was stunned when she found out. So that day, Barbara Henry went to the principal and told her she wanted Ruby and other first graders to be together. Mrs. Henry said, "By law, you have to integrate this school. Integration means putting black and white children in the same classroom. As I see it, you are breaking the law by keeping them separate." The principal of William Frantz wouldn't budge, but then Mrs. Henry suggested that they should call the superintendent of schools to talk about it. Barbara Henry and Ruby Bridges didn't know that they were changing history. That wasn't their intention. They were just doing what they believed was right, Mrs. Henry told me.
Who would scream at her, call her obscenities, demand that she be kept away from their children? What kind of people? American people. White American people in 1960. Author John Steinbeck told the story in these words. The show opened on time. Sound of sirens, motorcycle cops. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. 4 big marshals got out of each car, and from somewhere in the automobiles, they extracted the littlest Negro girl you ever saw. The little girl did not look at the howling crowd, but from the side, the whites of her eyes showed like those of a frightened fawn.
I remember them saying, don't turn around, walk straight ahead, and don't look back. And so that's what I did.
Those first steps were made famous in Norman Rockwell's painting of Ruby Bridges, called The Problem We All Live With. As riots and demonstrations raged across New Orleans, Ruby became a powerful symbol of the civil rights movement. The mob was there not just to harass the black children, but to keep white children out of school, to prove integration would not work. There were so few children left in the French school that little Ruby spent her first grade studying alone in a classroom with her teacher. Essentially, she was still segregated.
The federal marshals escorted me and my mom to my classroom. And I remember once I got there, and the teacher was standing there, and I thought I was early because there were all these desks and no kids. And I remember thinking, well, we're too early today. But that wasn't the case. I said,
Every other parent had pulled their kid out of school.
right,
So you were the only little girl in the first grade?
yes.
Well, there was a teacher who worked alongside Ruby day after day, making sure she got what she had braved so much for, an education. Please meet Barbara Henry. Ruby hasn't seen her in 35 years. Was that hard for you, Barbara?
Well, it was so wonderful to have a little student like Ruby that it really made it a pleasure. It was a sad time indeed, and it was an anxious time, but it was such a compelling situation that it was very easy for me.
How
to
did you
come to
end
school.
up teaching her? Because
Well,
they'd
I-
asked if you wanted to teach what, an
Yes, I was just new to New Orleans at that time, and I had applied to work in my Korea. And that weekend previous to integration, Superintendent Redmond called me on the phone and asked me if I would be interested in taking a first grade. And I said, yes, indeed I would. I had taught first grade previously. And then I asked him, was that to be an integrated class? And he said, yes, did I mind? And of course I certainly did not. And that was how I found myself.
When did
in
you
that
come to
position.
understand that you were only going to be teaching Ruby that year?
Only after I had Ruby.
Really? Because was it a surprise to you when nobody
yes,
came to class?
I assumed I would be teaching a class, and it would be integrated, as I had always thought of integration.
Then at the end of the year, weren't her grades so high that the school system decided that, you know...
The principal thought that wasn't realistic, that Ruby had sort of, in fact, been somewhat tutored, and so that wasn't a realistic appraisal of her ability, when, of course, we know today with all the wonderful things she's
That's right.
done, that it was quite accurate, quite accurate. So we had a grand time together, I think, side by side,
did.
just the two of us spent the year together.
So now, being an adult woman with perspective, don't you find that just remarkable that she was able to do that?
I do. I really do. She didn't have any friends. I mean, she was coming from Boston into the South. She was ostracized, and she actually taught me the lesson that I say Dr. King taught all of us. And even though she was white and she looked exactly like the people outside the school, she showed me her heart. You know, she made school fun. I never missed a day, and it was because of her.
Ruby and I together forged this wonderful bond, and really, I fell in love with her. We think we were a divinely designed team.
It was 54 years ago that 6-year-old Bridges made history by walking up the steps of what was an all-white public elementary school, despite blatant in-her-face opposition.
I knew that I had a very short walk. All I needed to do is get out of the car and walk through the crowd and get inside of the building, into my classroom, and I was going to have a good day.
She, by staying in school every day, was able to fulfill the mission and make real the command and the law of Brown versus Board in 1954. What transpired here will continue to be an effective source for making our country more whole and the tapestry that is our country more vibrant and dynamic than ever before.